I always thought the scariest thing about getting lost was not knowing where you are, but I was wrong. The scariest part is realizing something else already knows exactly where you are, and it's been waiting. It started on a Wednesday, middle of May, northern Nevada. That strange slice of desert where the mountains look like sleeping animals and the wind feels like it's whispering secrets just out of earshot. My wife Karen and I had taken 2 weeks off, packed up our fifth wheel and decided to disappear for a while. That was the idea. Disappear into peace, into stillness, into whatever version of silence the wild could offer. We had no plans beyond avoiding interstates. No KOAs, no commercial campgrounds, just dispersed camping, the way we used to do before we had full-time jobs and smartphones and 3 kinds of insurance for everything. The goal was a high-elevation basin called Dry Fork Ridge. Locals just call it the Bowl. I'd seen it on an old RV forum, not even on Google Maps unless you squint. The kind of place you reach by dirt roads that turn into gravel, then narrow ruts clawing through sagebrush and juniper. The kind of place where GPS tells you turn left into a canyon that doesn't exist. And we loved it for that. We'd left cell service behind nearly an hour before we saw the first fork. There was no marker, just a weathered fence post with a red scrap of bandana tied around it. I pulled the truck over and stared at it. "You think that's it?" Karen asked. I shrugged, scanning the brush. That or the next ghost road up the hill. I don't know why I felt weird about it then. Maybe it was the way the road disappeared so sharply to the left, swallowed into a cleft between 2 hills that didn't look quite right. Too symmetrical, maybe. Too expectant. Like a mouth held open. But I smiled. Worst case, we turn around. We didn't. It took us another 45 minutes to reach the bowl, and for a while it was everything we'd wanted. Miles of open space, juniper scattered like statues on a chessboard, the ridge curling around us in a wide, cradling arc, and most important, no other campers. Not a single fire ring. No trash, no drone of generators, just the wind and the sun and the 2 of us alone. That first night we lit a fire and drank boxed wine from tin mugs. Karen played music through a Bluetooth speaker, soft enough that it blurred into the wind, and we watched the light fade behind the western rim. I remember thinking it was almost too perfect. But it was the next morning that broke something. I woke to silence. Not just a lack of birdsong or breeze, but a kind of pressed-down hush, like the air itself had thickened overnight. I stepped outside with my coffee and noticed the fire ring had been disturbed. Ashes scattered. A chunk of blackened wood pulled halfway out of the stones. I called out to Karen, who was still brushing her teeth in the RV. "Did you mess with the fire last night?" She shook her head, toothbrush still in her mouth. "Why?" I pointed. She walked over, eyes narrowing. We both stood there for a long second. "Wind?" she asked. I wanted to say yes. That would have made sense. But there wasn't any wind, not even a breeze. And the tracks around the fire pit, well, they weren't quite human. Not animal either. Just smudges. Marks where the dust had been depressed unevenly, not dragged, not poured. Almost like something had squatted there. Heavy. Still. We didn't say much that day. Just did small things. Collected kindling, reorganized the undercompartment of the trailer, took a short hike up one of the side ridges. But even that hike felt off. There was no trail, of course. Just wild terrain. Karen pointed out how the ground felt soft in spots where it shouldn't. Like the sagebrush wasn't rooted deep. Like the whole ridge was hollow underfoot. We climbed for about 20 minutes until she stopped abruptly, holding her arm out to stop me. "Do you hear that?" I listened. Wind. Leaves. A faint creaking. But not like trees. More rhythmic, like a swing. Karen turned toward the far end of the ridge where a cluster of old pines leaned at a strange angle. Her voice dropped. "It sounds like rope." We didn't investigate. I wish I could say it was caution, but honestly, it was fear. The kind you don't admit out loud when the sun is still up. The kind that whispers not yet. Not when you're this far from help. We descended in silence. That night the wind came back. But it wasn't random. It came in waves, like breathing. We sat in the RV with the windows cracked, listening to the gusts press against the sides, then fade, then press again. Not chaotic, not stormy, just deliberate. Like something outside was learning the shape of our camper, measuring. We turned off the music, closed the blinds, locked the doors. Karen didn't sleep. I did, barely. And when I woke again, the fire pit had been disturbed again. This time it wasn't subtle. The rocks were scattered, not kicked, lifted. One of them had been placed carefully on the steps leading into the RV. A black triangular stone, flat and heavy. We'd never seen it before. Karen stood at the door, staring down at it. "That wasn't there last night," she said softly. "No." We didn't speak for a minute. Then, "We should move camp." She nodded. It took us an hour to hook up the trailer, but the truck wouldn't start. Battery was strong. Engine just clicked, no turnover. I tried everything. Jumper pack, switched to reserve battery, cleaned the terminals. Nothing. Karen didn't say anything while I worked. She just stood at the edge of the bowl, staring down the way we'd come in. Eventually she said, "There's something wrong with the road." I looked up. "What do you mean?" "It's different." I stood beside her. She was right. The ruts had filled in. The brush looked closer together. The whole road was unfamiliar, like the land had stitched itself back up while we slept. I felt something cold crawl through my chest. We were stuck, not just without a vehicle, without a direction, without a way out. That night we didn't light a fire, and the wind didn't come. Only silence, not peace, just a waiting kind of quiet. We tried to ration our fear the way we rationed the bottled water, slowly, carefully, pretending there was more than there really was. By mid-morning, I had the RV's generator running, enough to power the radio. We scanned for anything, NOAA weather, ham chatter, static even, but the dial was just one long stretch of dead air, top to bottom. Karen pulled out the old topo map we'd brought. She traced a trembling finger along the ridge lines. Dry Fork Ridge, here, I think, so the nearest service road would be east, 3 miles. It didn't seem far, but there was a problem. That eastern drop-off didn't have a visible path, no trailhead, just a slope of pale shale that descended into a narrow forested ravine. Even from up on the ridge, it looked cloaked, like walking into a yawn. I told Karen to stay behind, just in case I didn't come back before dark. She didn't argue. I packed light, flashlight, radio, handgun, granola, 2 bottles of water. I followed a deer path down into the tree line, careful to mark my trail with strips of orange survey tape every quarter mile. For the first hour it felt normal. Still, but normal. Dusty pine needles underfoot. Thick silence, like the air had been wrapped in wool. The ravine was tight, but manageable. Some rock slides had narrowed the way, but I could still squeeze between them. Then I found the first strip of tape. One I'd tied maybe 40 minutes earlier, on the wrong side of a tree. I stopped, checked the GPS watch. It still couldn't pick up signal, but the breadcrumb trail showed me doubling back somehow. I hadn't turned. I was sure of that. I stood there staring at the plastic ribbon flapping gently in the breeze. Something in the silence shifted. I turned slowly. Nothing behind me. But the forest felt closer. The shadows tighter. Trees that had been wide and spaced apart earlier now seemed drawn together, like ribs around a heart. I kept walking, trying not to let the feeling grow roots. But after 20 more minutes, I found another marker, one I hadn't placed. Same orange tape, same knot I used. But the branch it was tied to was dead and twisted, and I would never have chosen it. I took a photo, looked at the time. 2:34 p.m. I turned to head back. That's when I saw the print. In the dirt, just off the trail. At first glance, it looked like a hoof, but it was too wide. The edges were soft, not clean like a deer's, and it was deep, deeper than anything that size should have made. I crouched and ran a hand over it. Still warm, still fresh. I didn't wait. I ran, up the trail. Ignored the markers, just moved. Branches clawed at my face and arms. Rocks slid under my boots, but I kept going, lungs burning, the way ahead bending and shifting like it didn't want me to find my way out. By the time I made it back to camp, the sun was lower than it should have been. Karen was standing outside the RV, pale and shaking. "Where the hell were you?" she snapped. I told you, the ravine. You were gone 8 hours. I stared at her. No, I wasn't. I left at 11. It's after 7. I looked at my watch. 2:57 p.m. She held out her phone. The clock read 7:12. I tried to laugh it off, but something cold and nauseating twisted in my gut. I pulled my watch off, flipped the battery, reset it. Still 2:57. Karen showed me her phone again. Still no service. Just time. Marching on. She said the generator had shut off an hour after I left, and something started tapping on the side of the RV. Not knocking, she whispered. Tapping, like someone playing a song. She pulled me toward the door. There, in the dust by the steps, were prints. Not boot prints, not bare feet. They looked like knuckles, curved impressions like someone had walked on their hands. That night I didn't sleep. Neither did she. We sat on the bed, lights off, listening. At 3:17 a.m. it came back. The tapping. Not fast, not loud, just rhythmic, like the start of a nursery rhyme. Tap, tap, pause, tap. I gripped the handgun. Karen whispered, "It's circling." I nodded. The sound moved from the left window to the rear slide-out to the water tank door. Always the same beat. Tap, tap, pause, tap. I wanted to look, open the blind, see what was out there. But some part of me, something older than logic, screamed not to. We waited. The tapping stopped just before dawn. When we finally stepped outside, the triangle stone was back. This time on the roof, balanced perfectly on the center AC unit. I climbed up with a ladder, hands shaking. There was a word scratched into the plastic of the rooftop fan cover, not carved, etched with something sharp. The letters were faint, jagged. S-T-A-Y. I stared at the word for a long time. Stay. It wasn't a threat. That's what unsettled me most. Not a get out or leave. It was an invitation, a suggestion, a patient whisper. I climbed down, heart hammering. Karen watched me from below, face pale and unreadable. She asked what it said. I lied. Nothing, just scratches. She nodded like she didn't believe me, but didn't want to press. We went back inside. We made coffee, ate cereal we didn't taste, sat in silence while the RV ticked with heat. At some point I said, "We need to try the road again." She just said, "Okay." We unhooked everything, cleared camp as best we could. I checked the truck. Still no start, no turnover. Just that dead, useless click. Battery full, cables tight, no codes. Just refusal. We talked about walking out together, but the thought of leaving the RV behind, of turning our backs on it in that place felt wrong in a way I couldn't name. Instead, I offered to hike again, another direction, due south along the ridge where the rock formations opened into what looked like a box canyon. I didn't tell Karen this, but it was the only part of the bowl that hadn't felt watched. It felt forgotten. Maybe that was enough. She packed a bag this time, said she was coming with me. We left around 10 a.m., no trail, just scattered trees, dry grass, and the sound of our own breath. It took us almost 2 hours to reach the canyon mouth. I didn't realize until we stepped between the two sheer walls of rock just how quiet it had become. Not a single insect. No wind, not even birdsong, just the sound of our boots on stone, the whisper of fabric, our pulse in our ears. Karen spoke first. "Do you smell that?" I did. A faint scent, sweet, sickly, like fruit left too long in the sun. Not decay, just wrong, unripe and overripe at the same time. We turned a bend, and that's when we saw it. A campsite, not a recent one. Ancient, tent half collapsed, a rusted Coleman stove, bones in the fire ring, probably animal but stripped clean. And in the middle of it all, a faded blue camp chair facing the rock wall. Karen walked toward it. Her voice hollow. This shouldn't be here. I followed. The chair held something, a book, weathered, swollen from years of sun and snow. I picked it up. The cover was gone. Inside, a journal, no name, just entries, scattered, shaky handwriting, slanted to the left, open quote, Day 3, something walks at night. Day 5, it mimics her voice, but she's not here. Day 9, I saw myself outside the tent, watching me sleep. Day 11, the road disappeared, I think it feeds on time. Day 12, I'm staying, it's quieter when I stay, close quote. I closed the book, my hands were shaking. Karen whispered, "Let's go." We didn't talk until we got back to the RV. It was dusk. and something was off. The steps were out. We'd pulled them in. I was certain of it. The entry door was unlocked. We always locked it. Inside, the couch cushions were rearranged. Our photos, all the ones on the wall tacked above the table, had been flipped, not removed, just turned upside down. There was no sign of forced entry. No scratches, no tracks, only silence. I checked the cabinets. Karen checked the bathroom. Then she screamed. I ran in. She was pointing to the mirror. It was fogged, but the air was dry. Written in the fog, one word, M-I-N-E. She backed away. I wiped it off. My fingers trembled. There was no heat, no steam, no water running. The generator was off. We sat outside for a while under the awning, staring at the sky like maybe it would change things. Like the stars would rearrange themselves into something useful. They didn't. That night we tried sleeping in shifts, Karen first. I kept the lights off. Sat in the dinette with a gun in my lap, staring out the darkened window, trying not to blink. At 2:12 a.m. something moved. Not outside, inside. A soft shuffle, fabric against fabric, in the rear bunk. I stood slow and quiet, heart punching my ribs. I whispered Karen's name. She didn't stir. I moved to the back. Opened the curtain. Empty. Except the blanket had been pulled down. A small depression in the pillow, like someone had laid their head there. I backed out. That's when I saw the figure outside. Not close. Far, maybe 60 yards on the ridgeline, against the stars. It didn't move, didn't sway, just watched. I didn't wake Karen. I watched it until sunrise. When I blinked, it was gone. The next day was the worst. I don't mean something big happened. I mean nothing did. Not a bird, not a squirrel, not even that ghost of wind we used to hear circling the ridge. It was like the land had swallowed its own noise. And I think that's when we both began to come apart. Karen sat outside for hours, staring at the tree line with that stillness she only used when she was truly afraid. Still like prey, not peace. Her face had changed. Thinner, maybe. Shadows beneath her cheekbones. She looked like she hadn't slept in a week. I tried to talk to her, but she just whispered, "We're not on the map anymore." I didn't know what she meant until I pulled the topo again. She was right. The ridge lines looked wrong. The angles didn't match. The elevation felt off. Even the compass needle spun slow, lazy circles instead of pointing north. I told myself it was magnetic interference, a mineral vein in the rock, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. At noon, I hiked 50 yards from camp to dig a cathole. I walked in a straight line, counting paces. When I turned around, the RV was gone. I spun, heart hammering, convinced I'd lost direction. I walked the path back, counting again. Still nothing. I climbed a rock outcrop, scanned the horizon, and there it was. Behind me, I hadn't turned. I knew I hadn't turned, but the RV had circled around without a sound. I ran back. Karen was sitting on the steps, pale and confused. "You were gone a minute," she said. I showed her my watch. 47 minutes had passed. She checked the time on hers. 11 minutes. We stopped using the watches after that. Instead, we kept time by the sky, though even that seemed unreliable. The shadows would stretch wrong across the ground. Noon would look like dusk, then snap back to morning light in a blink. We ate without tasting, slept without dreaming. Until the night we heard the voices. It began just after midnight, a soft sound like a distant radio, fuzzy, glitchy. I stepped outside, gun drawn, flashlight off. The sound came from beyond the bowl's edge, toward the forest we'd avoided. Karen joined me, barefoot, shivering. We listened, and this is what we heard. "Please, stay. Please, don't leave, please." It was my voice, clear, unmistakable. Karen grabbed my arm. "Tell me that's not you." "I swear to God." Then her voice, "I'm cold, I'm cold, I'm cold." It repeated, over and over. Not a recording, not exact. Each repetition was slightly off, like a child learning lines. Karen backed toward the door. "We need to leave. Now." "On foot?" "I don't care." We packed within 15 minutes. Backpacks, 1 water jug, 2 flashlights, a flare. We didn't speak. We walked west toward the cliffs. No road, no plan, just movement. We hiked through dry gulches and over crumbling stone. The voices followed us, not louder, but closer, every hour, as if the land itself was echoing them back at us. Sometimes I'd hear Karen ahead say something, but when I caught up, she'd swear she hadn't spoken. Once, I saw a light in the trees, like a camp lantern, flickering orange, low to the ground. I almost ran to it, but Karen stopped me. It's not real. How do you know? Because it's inside the rock. And it was, flickering behind a sheer granite wall like it had been buried alive. That's when I understood. This place wasn't just lost, it was inverted. Not haunted, not cursed, folded, like a map crumpled in a stranger's hand. We were inside the fold. The next morning, or what passed for it, we found a fence line. Rusted, tangled with barbed wire. At its centre, a narrow, hand-built gate. Open. Karen looked at me. We go through? I hesitated, then nodded. We stepped into a clearing and stopped cold. The RV was there, exactly as we'd left it. Same chairs, same fire pit, but it couldn't be. We'd hiked miles, crossed canyons, climbed ridges, and somehow we were back. Karen screamed. I turned to grab her and saw something behind the RV. It was tall, thin, not quite human, and watching us. I didn't see its face, only the outline. Too tall, knees slightly bent, shoulders sloped like it was ducking to avoid tearing the sky. Karen backed into me, whispering, "Don't move, don't run." But every nerve in my body screamed to do exactly that. I blinked. It was closer, not with a step, not with movement, just closer. Like blinking had let it skip a few seconds forward. Karen grabbed my arm, her fingernails dug in. "I'm going to count to 3, she said, barely audible. "Then we run for the RV. I'll open the door. Doesn't matter if it's start or if it starts. Drive." I didn't answer. I couldn't. She counted anyway. 1. The figure stayed still. 2. Closer. Arms now visible, too long, elbows that bent the wrong way. 3. We ran, across gravel that felt like glue. Air thick, heavy, electric. We threw ourselves into the RV, slammed the door and locked it. I didn't expect the engine to start, but it did. First turn. I didn't think, just floored it. We tore through the brush, down the trail we thought was gone, branches slamming the windshield, sage crushing beneath the tires. Karen was crying, not sobbing. Just quiet tears running down her face, mouth tight. I kept driving. We hit a bump that cracked the rear stabilizer. Didn't care. Another curve, another blind dip. Then, miracle. The road, the real road, gravel, then dirt, then the skeleton of a county sign. I didn't stop, not for 2 more hours. Not until we hit a gas station on the outskirts of Elko, dusty and blinking in the midday sun. We sat in the lot, engine off, windows up. I looked at my phone, full service. I turned to Karen. She didn't speak, just looked out the window. Eventually, she whispered, "It let us go." I didn't argue, because deep down I felt the same thing. It let us go. That night, we got a motel, one with loud neighbors and cable TV and an ice machine that clanged every hour. We slept in the same bed, facing opposite walls. We didn't talk about going home. We didn't talk about anything. But I dreamed of the bowl, of that thing, and the word etched into the plastic, "Stay." The next day, I went to a library, found an old USGS map, traced the contours. Dry Fork Ridge was there. But the bowl? No mention, no name, no elevation mark, no trail. I asked the librarian if there were any disappearances in that region. She said yes, 3, all within the past 20 years, all marked as unexplained vehicle abandonment. One family, one solo traveler, one couple. No signs of struggle, just empty camps. I asked if they were ever found. She said no. Karen and I never camped off-grid again. Not in the way we used to. Not after that. We tried once, 6 months later, in Arizona. But that night, when the wind started breathing through the tent flaps in the same rhythmic pattern, push, pause, pull, she looked at me and said, "No, we're not doing this." We packed in the dark and left. She doesn't talk about it now, not even when I bring it up. She just shakes her head and says, "That place isn't on the map. It is the map." I don't know what she means by that, but I know how it feels. Like something shaped that land to reflect what you fear most. Like it waits. For couples who think they can vanish for a while. For people who think solitude is a gift. For anyone who believes that being unreachable makes them safe. It waits where GPS fails. It's been almost 2 years now. Sometimes I forget for a while. Long enough to convince myself it wasn't real. long enough to let the distance blur the sharp edges. But then something slips through, a sound, a pattern, a scent, and I'm back there. In the bowl, in the silence. I still camp. I still love the road. The hum of the tires on pavement, the way the night smells after rain in the high desert, the peace you get when you're far enough from cities that the stars feel like they're within reach. But I don't go off-grid anymore. Not really. Not where the GPS blinks out and the roads forget their shape and the wind starts breathing with your breath. Sometimes I tell myself it was psychological. Mass suggestion, sleep deprivation, isolation. I've read the theories. I've read the books. I've told myself it was just my brain misfiring in an unfamiliar place. But then I remember the footprints, the way my voice called to us from the trees, the word on the roof, and I know better. It wasn't in our heads. We were in its. Whatever it is. I've started to think of it not like a thing, but a place. Or maybe something inside a place. A fault line in the earth where rules bend. A pressure point where time and direction don't behave. Like a fold in fabric that someone or something left unattended. I don't believe it wanted to kill us. That would have been simple. Quick, but it didn't want death. It wanted presence. It wanted to be seen, acknowledged, remembered. The bowl doesn't feed on fear the way stories say. It feeds on attention. It eats your hours, your maps, your bearings. It plays house with your memories and then returns them to you just wrong enough that you question yourself. And that's the part I can't escape. That's the part that stayed. Because it didn't follow us back. It wrote itself into us. Karen doesn't say much these days. She gardens. She listens to music. She takes long walks at sunrise when the neighborhood's still asleep. Sometimes I catch her staring off at the tree line behind our property, like she's trying to remember something, but it's always just out of reach. Once I asked her if she remembered the way the stars looked out there in the bowl. That strange clarity, like they were carved into glass. She nodded and said quietly, "They weren't our stars." And I believed her. I still have the triangle stone. It was in the rear storage when we got home, buried in the bin with spare lanterns and fuses. We never packed it. It wasn't ours. I keep it in a locked drawer, not because I think it's dangerous, but because I don't want to forget, not fully. Because forgetting is the first step back. And if you go back, if you stay, you won't come out again as yourself. You won't know what's missing until it starts talking with your voice, asking for help in the dark. You won't know what's watching until you blink, and it's already standing closer than before. You won't know where you are, because there's a place in the wild where the trails unmake themselves, and the silence learns your name. A place where lost doesn't mean gone. It means held. And maybe you'll think it's peace at first. Solitude. Escape. But then the map stops matching the land, and the air starts folding in strange directions, and your reflection doesn't blink when you do. And then you'll know you've entered the place that waits, where satellites can't see you, where names don't matter, where time drips sideways, where GPS fails, and where something else doesn't. I should have listened to that feeling in my gut, the one that whispered something wasn't right before we even crossed into West Virginia. It started as a slow burn, a flicker of hesitation as we passed the rusted "Welcome to Wild, Wonderful West Virginia" sign on Route 33. That sign should have been a warning. I don't mean in some metaphorical horror movie way. I mean in a real, visceral sense. The kind that clings to the back of your throat and makes your knuckles go white on the steering wheel without even realizing why. It was early October when we rolled into the Monongahela wilderness, somewhere between Richwood and the edge of the Cranberry backcountry. I was driving our 2011 Winnebago Mini with my girlfriend Lana riding shotgun. My name's Chris, 32 at the time, and Lana was 28. A photographer from Asheville with a habit of chasing places no one had ever heard of. That's how we ended up picking this spot. She found a vague mention of an old dispersed campground near Cold Run Hollow on an obscure hiking forum with just enough detail to feel adventurous but not reckless. That's the mistake we made. Right there. Confusing the two. We were meeting up with another couple, Ben and Rachel, who were already deep in the holler ahead of us. Ben was an old friend from my college days, the kind of guy who brewed his own mead, wore moccasins unironically, and could identify every edible mushroom east of the Mississippi. He and Rachel had set up camp the night before, and when we spoke to them over patchy signal in Richwood, Ben told me, "You'll know the turn when you see the busted blue mailbox on the stump. After that, keep going until the road stops looking like a road." He laughed like it was a joke. It wasn't. The GPS gave up about 10 miles out. The road turned into a gravel switchback that slithered up a ridge like something feral. Trees on either side closed in, thick and tall, birch and spruce twisting above us like they were conspiring. Fog rolled in low to the ground, and I had to lean forward in my seat to navigate the tire-rutted trail. Every few minutes, the Winnebago jolted so hard it felt like the axles would snap. Lana was dead quiet. I glanced at her once, and she was just staring out the window, eyebrows pulled in close. She'd been excited, giddy even, right up until we turned onto that unmarked road. Now she looked like she was bracing for something. I asked if she was okay. She didn't answer. We found the blue mailbox, or what was left of it, nailed to a rotting stump on the right side of the trail. Ben hadn't exaggerated. After that, the road was little more than a suggestion. It twisted down into a ravine, climbed another ridge, and finally leveled out onto a flat, grassy opening rimmed by black oak and pine. There was a faint smell of wood smoke in the air, comforting at first. Then we saw the fire pit. It was dead cold. Ben and Rachel's camp was there, but no one else was. Their old orange canvas tent sagged slightly under the mist. A Coleman stove sat on a folding table, half covered by a towel. 2 mugs, still crusted with coffee, were next to a ceramic pipe. It looked lived in, used that morning, maybe an hour ago. But the fire pit was empty. No coals, no smoke, just a black circle in the grass like something burned it from underneath. I honked once, no answer. Lana opened the passenger door and stepped out. She was wearing a red flannel shirt and had her camera slung across her neck. She clicked a few shots automatically, more out of habit than anything. Then she paused and looked at me. "They're not here," she said. "No," I replied, "but they were. Recently." I stepped out too, the air immediately cooler than it had been in the Winnebago. Not just colder, sharper, like the wind carried splinters. We walked over to the tent, careful not to touch anything. Lana called Ben's name, then Rachel's, her voice echoing in a strange, unnatural way, like it didn't belong to the woods around us. The pines didn't rustle, no birds called, no squirrels scrambled. Just our own breathing and the crunch of dry leaves beneath our boots. We found their boots still inside the tent, all 4 arranged neatly. That's when my stomach sank. Ben never took his boots off in the woods. I called his phone, straight to voicemail. I tried Rachel's. Same thing. Lana checked her camera battery and asked if I was okay with her taking a few more photos just in case. I nodded, though my focus was narrowing. Tunnel vision. I was beginning to notice the details. There were drag marks about 10 feet from the fire pit, faint but there, like something had been pulled but not by a person. Not straight lines, more like wide arcs in the damp soil, as if something heavy had been twisted, not carried. Then I saw the carvings, not in the trees, on the stones around the pit. Symbols about the size of a hand, gouged deep into the surface with something sharp. They weren't letters. They weren't anything I recognized. Circular, layered, like overlapping mazes. They made my eyes hurt just to look at. Lana crouched down next to one and reached out, but I caught her wrist before she touched it. "We shouldn't be here," I said. "Chris!" "I'm serious." We both turned at the same time when we heard something snap behind us, like a branch under pressure. Not far off, maybe 30 feet. But when we looked, there was nothing. Just that heavy fog swallowing the tree line. I called out again, shouted this time. Still nothing. We waited another 20 minutes, walking the perimeter of the clearing, but no one came. The forest was thick, overgrown, impassable in most places unless you knew how to bushwhack. Ben could have gone off trail, he'd done it before, but not without his boots, not without his gear. Lana suggested we stay the night, just in case they came back. I agreed, partly because we had nowhere else to go, but mostly because I was still pretending this could all make sense. We parked the RV facing the exit trail and locked every door and window. That night, we cooked inside. Didn't dare touch their camp or move anything. Lana didn't talk much. She downloaded her photos onto her laptop and stared at them in silence. And then, maybe around 2 a.m., we both woke up at the same time. No sound, no motion, just awake, eyes wide, breath shallow. The temperature had dropped so suddenly the inside of the RV was coated in condensation, the windows fogged, the walls damp. I reached for my phone to check the time. That's when the knocking started. 3 knocks, slow, on the back wall of the RV where the spare tire is mounted. We froze. Then it knocked again. The knocks weren't loud. They weren't forceful, but they were deliberate. 3, spaced perfectly apart, like whoever or whatever was on the other side wasn't trying to break in. It was testing, announcing. I didn't move. Lana didn't breathe. I could feel her fingers tighten around my forearm under the blanket. I could hear her heartbeat through her sleeve. For a second, I thought I might have imagined it. Maybe it was the creaking of the metal frame. Maybe it was condensation shifting. But then it came again. 3 more knocks, identical rhythm, identical weight, this time from the side window, the one facing the woods. I turned my head slowly, just enough to see the glass through the thin curtain. It was fogged over, but I could make out the shape of a handprint. 5 fingers, not smudged, pressed flat, too large to be Lana's, too high for a child. I whispered, "Don't move," and slowly reached for the drawer beside the kitchenette. My pocket knife was inside, just a 3-inch blade, barely enough to open a can, let alone defend against someone or something outside in the pitch black. Another knock. From the back again, and then nothing. Silence. The kind of silence that has gravity to it, that presses on your eardrums like deep water. We stayed frozen for what felt like hours, every nerve in my body straining toward the walls. I was listening for breath, for footsteps, for anything that would tell me we weren't alone out there. But the forest gave nothing back. Eventually, the fog on the windows began to clear. The night bled on. I didn't sleep. Neither did Lana. I sat up in the booth seat with a pocket knife in one hand and the curtain slightly cracked in the other. Dawn came slow and colorless. When the light finally broke over the tree line, I stepped out first. Every bone in my body resisted. I walked around the RV in bare feet, the grass cold and wet and sharp like needles. I found no footprints, no markings on the wall, nothing on the back spare tire cover. But the handprint on the side window was still there, still fresh, still perfect. Lana came out a few minutes later, camera in hand, but she didn't take any pictures. She just stood next to me, staring at the mark. I knew what she was thinking, because I was thinking the same thing. That wasn't a prank. That wasn't weather. That wasn't anything we could explain. And Ben and Rachel were still missing. By noon, I made the decision to hike back toward where we came in, hoping for signal. Lana wanted to come, but I told her to stay at the RV, keep the doors locked, and only open them for me or Ben. I didn't like the idea of splitting up, but I liked the idea of staying even less. The trail was worse on foot. Ruts deeper than I remembered, the trees denser. Every sound was amplified, the snap of a twig, the shuffle of leaves, the occasional rustle that stopped the moment I stopped. I carried a camp axe in one hand, my phone in the other. Every 100 yards I held it up, hoping for a single bar of service. Nothing. An hour into the hike, I came across something that hadn't been there the day before. A white plastic bag hanging from a branch about 6 feet off the ground. It was tied tight with twine and swinging slightly in the breeze. Inside, I could see what looked like bones. Rabbit, maybe squirrel, maybe something else. Below it, on the ground, were more of those same spiral symbols carved into flat stones. 6 or 7 of them, arranged in a circle, One of them had a fresh smear of something dark across its center. That was when I turned around. I never found service. I never made it to the trailhead. Something in me, I don't know what, screamed not to keep going. I had the overwhelming sense that if I passed that next bend in the trail, I wouldn't come back. That whatever was out there didn't want us walking out on our own terms. I jogged back, lungs burning, every shadow twitching in the corner of my eyes. When I finally broke through to the clearing, I saw Lana standing outside the RV, crying. She was pointing at something behind the trees on the far side of the site, near where the forest dropped off into a steep ravine. I ran to her, heart pounding, and followed her gaze. Ben's pack was there, sitting upright on the moss like someone had just taken it off. Next to it was one of his boots, laces untied. Still warm to the touch. But no Ben, no Rachel, no footprints leading in, none leading out. Lana told me she hadn't seen anyone. 1 minute it wasn't there, the next it was. She hadn't heard anything, no footsteps, no voices, nothing but wind. We debated leaving right then, but something strange held us back. It wasn't stupidity, it wasn't bravery. It was disorientation, like we were stuck in a loop that kept resetting just before we made a decision. I'd say, let's go, and then something would catch my eye, a mark in the grass, a strange echo, and suddenly it felt like maybe we should wait, just a little longer, just until we understood what we were looking at. That night, we tried to sleep in shifts. I watched the woods with a flashlight and the axe in my lap. Every now and then I'd hear something, always distant, always deliberate. Not animals, not birds. Whistles, 3 notes, high, low, high, same pattern, over and over again. Like someone was mimicking a call but didn't quite understand how sound worked. At one point, the whistle came from one side of the clearing and was answered from the other. Lana whispered from the bed, "Do you hear that?" I nodded. My mouth was too dry to speak. Neither of us slept that night. By morning, we were packed and ready to leave. I backed the Winnebago down the overgrown trail with Lana walking in front, guiding me past the trees and rocks. We didn't talk. We didn't even breathe unless we had to. And then we saw them. Just before the final bend in the trail, maybe half a mile from the county road, they stepped out from behind the trees. 2 men. Dressed in heavy canvas jackets, faces smeared with something dark, mud or paint. One had a long stick with feathers tied to the end. The other held something in his hand. It took me a second to realize it was a piece of Rachel's red scarf. They didn't speak. They just stared. Not like strangers, like they knew us. I braked hard, not because I meant to, but because my body reacted before my mind could catch up. Lana stopped walking. She was about 20 feet in front of the RV when she saw them, those 2 men in the trees. She turned slowly, raised both her hands in a cautious, open gesture, like she was trying to make it clear we weren't looking for trouble. But the men didn't move. They just stood there, half shrouded by the branches, close enough now that I could see the details. Their eyes weren't wide or wild. They weren't angry. They weren't even curious. They were flat, blank, like they weren't really seeing us. Or maybe they were and they just didn't care. One of them had no eyebrows. His skin looked leathery, like it had been sunburned 1,000 times and never healed. The other had a limp, his left leg dragging just slightly behind the right, the foot turned at an unnatural angle, but neither seemed in pain. They weren't threatening in the traditional sense. There were no raised weapons, no yelling, no rush toward us. That made it worse. I leaned my head out the window and called, "Hey, we're just leaving. We didn't mean to trespass or anything." The one with the stick turned his head slightly, almost like a dog hearing something distant. Then he smiled. His teeth were black. Or maybe not black, maybe gone entirely. Just holes where they should have been. The other man didn't smile. He raised the scarf to his nose and inhaled slowly. Lana backed up, inch by inch, until she was at the passenger door. She climbed in without taking her eyes off them. I threw the RV into reverse and started backing up the rest of the trail, watching the 2 shapes shrink into the trees. They didn't follow. Not yet. We reached the county road within 10 minutes, faster than we should have. The Winnebago jolted and scraped its undercarriage in places I would have usually gone around, but I didn't care. We hit pavement like we were breaking through the surface of a nightmare, and for a moment, I swear, it felt like oxygen returned to the world. Lana was crying, silently. The kind where your face doesn't change, but the tears keep coming. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. We drove until we reached a gas station near Cowan, a small, lonely place with a rusted ice machine and an overgrown payphone out front. The man behind the counter looked up when we walked in, gave us a nod, and went back to organizing cigarette cartons. We grabbed water, chips, anything that felt like it belonged to the real world, and just stood there under the fluorescents, trying to remember how to breathe like normal people again. Eventually, I asked if he knew anything about Cold Run Hollow. The clerk glanced at me, then at Lana, then looked away. "You got turned around out there?" he asked. I nodded. "Kinda. Some friends were camping. We haven't seen them. It's strange." He stared at me for a second too long. Then he said, "Ain't no one supposed to be back that far. Ain't no maintained trails since the flood in '09. Not unless you're with the Forest Service." I told him we saw people, 2 men. He nodded slowly. Yup. That was it, I pressed. Asked if anyone else had gone missing. He shrugged. People go missing all the time out here. Sometimes they want to, sometimes they don't. There was something in his voice. Not coldness, just inevitability. Like we'd come from a place that no longer belonged to rules or reason. As we were leaving, he added something that stuck with me more than anything else. "If you came back out of there," he said, "count yourself lucky. Hollow takes more than it gives." I didn't respond, just nodded and got back in the RV. We drove for 3 hours without stopping. Lana stared out the window the whole time, silent, hands trembling every so often like an aftershock. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror. Not because I thought someone was following us, but because I couldn't shake the feeling we'd brought something back. I wanted to believe the worst of it was over, that we'd escaped whatever lived out there. But that night, hundreds of miles away, parked in a Walmart lot in Virginia, I stepped out to get some air and found another handprint. Same size, same shape, same spot on the glass. Lana saw it too. We scrubbed the window, disinfected it, wiped it down 5 times over. But the next morning, it was there again. Clean, dry, fresh. That was the beginning of the 3rd phase. We tried to rationalize it. That's what your mind does when it wants the world to make sense. Maybe it was just a smudge we hadn't noticed. Maybe condensation had dried in a pattern. Maybe we were both too tired and too wound up to see straight. But the next morning, the handprint wasn't the only thing waiting on the RV. There was a feather tucked under the windshield wiper. Long, grey-white, mottled with dirt and something reddish at the base. It hadn't been there when I went out the night before, and I knew without doubt that it wasn't something a bird had dropped. It had been placed, deliberately. Lana stopped sleeping after that. We made it home, back to Asheville, back to the townhouse we shared just off the French Broad River, but it didn't feel like home anymore. The first night, we both jumped at the sound of the ice maker. The second night, the power went out for 6 hours. The third night, I woke up at 3:03 a.m. and found Lana standing at the back door, barefoot, staring out into the woods. She didn't hear me at first when I asked what she was doing. She just said, in a voice that didn't sound like hers, "They don't know where we live. They can't cross over unless we open the gate again." I asked her what gate. She blinked like she was waking up from a trance. Then she said she didn't remember coming downstairs. The next day, she packed a bag and drove to her sister's place in Knoxville. She said she needed space to clear her head, that she couldn't sleep knowing something was watching her, that she kept hearing those whistles, high, low, high, outside her window just before sunrise. I told her it was okay, that I'd keep an eye on things, but she wasn't the only one hearing it. I started dreaming about the woods. Not metaphorical dreams, real ones. Vivid, textured. I'd feel the weight of the fog on my skin, the cold, wet leaves under my boots. I could hear the wind humming low through the trees like it had a voice underneath it. I could see the same trail we'd driven down, the same blue mailbox on the stump, the same ravine. But in the dream, I always saw Ben, standing at the edge of the clearing, wearing a white shirt stained red, holding up 3 fingers, and mouthing something. I couldn't hear it. Not until the 6th night. That night he didn't mouth it, he said it, clear as day. You didn't leave. I sat up gasping, soaked in sweat, my heart racing like I'd been running. I looked at the clock, 3:03 a.m. again, and there on the floor by the foot of the bed was mud. 3 boot prints, not mine, not Lana's, just 3, leading in, not out. I didn't sleep after that. I started doing research, deep research, backwoods message boards, Reddit threads with more deleted comments than live ones, obscure books in the back of metaphysical shops run by people who didn't ask questions. I found patterns. Not full stories, never full stories, but whispers. Cold Run Hollow was part of what they used to call the Burned Tongue, a stretch of Appalachia known for disappearances going back to the 1800s. Coal barons tried to build there and failed. Survey teams never came back. Whole settlements that were plotted out on paper but never appeared in person. The forest took them back, like they were never there. And those spiral carvings, one blog called them briarglyphs, said they weren't language in the way we understand it, more like invitations. Traps, openings. The spiral didn't mean come in, it meant you're already inside. I tried contacting the Forest Service, left a message with a ranger station in Marlinton. No one called me back. I tried to find Ben's parents. Their landline was disconnected. The only address I could find for them had a for sale sign out front and 3 padlocks on the door. Rachel's Facebook hadn't updated since the week before we left. Her last photo was of the woods. Caption, "Nowhere has ever felt more like nowhere than this." I started having trouble with the lights, just mine, none of the neighbours. At first I chalked it up to wiring, old house, old problems, but it was always the same time. Just after 3 a.m, the hallway bulb would flicker once, then shut off completely. The porch light would pulse like something was walking past it, and the handprint on the RV, still there. Even after I sold it. I watched the dealership guy scrub it with industrial cleaner, only to come back 20 minutes later looking pale. Said he didn't want the trade-in anymore, didn't even charge me for breaking the contract. Something's not right with that rig, he told me. When I was inside, it felt like someone was breathing on my neck, but I was alone. By this point I was unraveling. People at work started noticing. I wasn't eating, I wasn't shaving, I wasn't returning calls. My boss sent me home to rest. I didn't argue, because I knew where I had to go. Back to West Virginia. Not to find Ben, not to find Rachel. I think deep down I already knew they weren't coming back. I had to see it again. I had to face it. I drove through the night, following old printed maps because I didn't trust GPS anymore. Somewhere outside Beckley, the radio started fuzzing in and out, even on stations that had been crystal clear just minutes earlier. Not static, not white noise, just something else, a low warble, like a voice underwater, rising and falling with no language, just rhythm. I turned it off. The closer I got to Cold Run Hollow, the heavier the air became, like the atmosphere thickened mile by mile. My ears wouldn't pop. My head felt full of pressure, like something was pushing in through my sinuses and crawling down the back of my neck. When I finally pulled onto that unmarked trail again, past the collapsed blue mailbox on the stump, I realized I wasn't afraid. I was resigned. The gravel crunched beneath my tires, the same way it had weeks ago. The trees leaned closer than I remembered, their upper branches touching like a canopy. No birds, no wind, no movement. It was like the forest was holding its breath. I reached the clearing near dusk. The campsite was exactly how we'd left it. Ben's pack still resting on the moss, the fire pit still black, the spiral stones still ringed around the center like a mouth frozen mid-scream. But the tent? Gone. No trace. Not even the flattened patch of grass where it had stood. I stepped out of the car and listened. The woods hummed, just below the threshold of sound. I couldn't place it. Not an animal, not a machine, just a vibration in the bones. I took the axe from my trunk and a flashlight, then walked toward the far edge of the clearing, the place where the men had stood that day. The trail there was narrower than I remembered, like the forest had grown overnight and never receded. Brambles clawed at my jacket, thorns bit into my arms, but I didn't stop. I followed the whistle. High, low, high. It came again and again, leading me deeper. It was almost dark when I reached the ravine. The air dropped 10 degrees. My breath fogged in front of me. I should have turned back, but something was pulling. Not physically, just emotionally. The same way a nightmare pulls you forward, even when you know what's waiting. Then I saw the light. A faint amber glow between the trees, flickering like fire. I moved toward it slowly, stepping over roots, ducking beneath low-hanging branches until I came to a small hollow. There were 5 figures sitting around a campfire, but they weren't camping. They weren't people, not anymore. They wore scraps of clothes, flannel, canvas, wool, bits of modern gear, some handmade, some molded from materials I couldn't identify. Their skin was marked with soot and grease. Spirals painted across their faces and hands. Their hair was matted, thick with twigs and moss, but the worst part, they were dead quiet. No conversation, no singing, no laughter, just sitting, breathing in perfect rhythm with the fire. And at the edge of the firelight was a tree, a massive, ancient oak split down the middle by lightning, its trunk hollowed out like a wound. Inside that wound I saw Rachel, her face, her eyes. Looking straight at me, she didn't scream, didn't cry, she just stared. Blinked once, then slowly raised her hand, 3 fingers, same gesture as in my dream. One of the figures by the fire turned, and I saw his face. Ben, his beard was overgrown, his cheeks sunken, but it was him. No question. He was alive, sort of. His eyes met mine, and for a split second they changed, recognition, horror, then gone again, replaced by the same vacant stillness the others wore. I stepped back, twigs cracked underfoot, they all stood in unison. Not fast, not aggressive, just synchronized. I turned and ran. Branches whipped my face, my chest burned. My legs screamed. But I ran without stopping. I didn't look back until I hit the clearing again and slammed the car door behind me. No one followed. Not that I could see. I peeled out of there like a madman, headlights bouncing wildly over rocks and mud. My mind couldn't keep up with what I'd seen. It was like I'd stepped into a parallel world, a place where time and humanity didn't mean the same thing anymore. By the time I reached the highway, I couldn't even remember how long I'd been gone. My phone was dead. My watch had stopped. I drove straight until the sun came up. Didn't speak to anyone for days. Didn't tell Lana what I saw. But every now and then I'll catch something in my peripheral vision. A flicker in the mirror, a shape behind the trees, and I'll remember what Ben's eyes looked like, just for that one moment before they changed. He knew me. He knew I was there, and he wanted me to remember. I didn't go back to work. I didn't answer Lana's calls. I barely left the house. Not because I was afraid they would come for me, but because I wasn't sure they ever really let me leave. The woods didn't stay in West Virginia. They followed me back. In my sleep. In my silence. In every still moment when the refrigerator hummed or the pipes groaned or the floor creaked in a way that didn't match the way I stepped on it that morning. The spiral wasn't a symbol. It was a pattern, a rhythm, a return. I spent days replaying that moment, Ben's face in the firelight, his eyes flickering back to the person I remembered, if only for a blink. That second haunts me more than anything else. It told me he wasn't gone. Not completely, which meant he was trapped, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Rachel hadn't raised those 3 fingers to say, "I see you." She was counting. 3 left, 3 chosen. 3 who left when they weren't supposed to. That's the thing about places like Cold Run Hollow. They don't care about your logic. They don't play by rules. They don't want your fear. They want your presence. They want you to stay, and I didn't. That meant something had to come back with me. The smell was the first real clue. not in the house, on me. A musty, earthy scent that clung to my skin no matter how many times I showered, like wet leaves and rotted pine. I'd wake up with it in my hair, on my clothes, in my mouth. Then the noise started, tapping. Always at 3:03 a.m., sometimes from the ceiling, sometimes from inside the walls, once from under the bed. I recorded it, set up cameras, motion sensors. Half the footage glitched out. The half that didn't only caught the moment after the sound. Never the moment it started. Always the reaction. Never the cause. The spiral was working its way inward, and that's when Lana called. She was crying. Not panicked, ashamed. She said she'd seen Ben, in Knoxville, outside her sister's house, just standing at the edge of the tree line near the backyard. Same expression, same beard, same eyes. No movement, no blinking, just waiting. She didn't run out to him. She didn't scream. She didn't even take a picture. She closed the curtains, went into the bathroom, threw up, then drove back to Asheville. She was standing on my porch when I opened the door, eyes sunken, lips chapped. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. I hadn't either. She walked past me into the house and said one sentence. "They're calling us back." I nodded, because I knew. The gate hadn't just opened when we drove into the hollow. It had opened through us. Whatever rituals were etched into those stones, they weren't static. They moved, through memory, through connection, through recognition. Ben had seen me. Rachel had marked me. And now the forest wanted the rest of what we'd taken away. That night, Lana slept on the couch with the lights on. I stayed in the bedroom listening to the walls breathe, and at exactly 3:03 a.m. the tapping started again. Only this time it wasn't tapping, it was scratching. From the inside. I stood up, heart pounding, unsure if I was asleep or dreaming or both. The scratching grew louder, faster, from the corner of the room, then the closet, then behind the mirror, then silence, and a knock. 3 times. From the bathroom door. I didn't move, I just stood there staring at the hallway, my hand trembling at my side. The knock came again, 3 slow thuds. Lana screamed. I sprinted down the hall and found her curled into the couch cushions, pointing at the front door. Her voice cracked as she said, "He's here." I looked through the peephole. Nothing. Then I opened the door. There was no one outside, but there was something on the welcome mat. A photo. An old Polaroid. Faded, curling at the edges. Black and white. It showed our RV, parked in the clearing, fire pit in the center, Ben and Rachel sitting by the stones. Lana holding her camera. Me, staring directly at the lens. I never remembered that photo being taken. Lana picked it up, turned it over. On the back, written in a shaky, rust-colored scrawl, "You never left." The words didn't make sense. Not logically. Not in any way that fit the rules we grew up with. But somewhere beneath my ribs, something cold and certain settled in. We'd left the clearing, but the clearing hadn't left us. I turned the photo over again and again, trying to understand how it even existed. Lana didn't say anything. She just stood at the sink, staring at her reflection in the kitchen window, like she was waiting for it to blink first. I kept thinking maybe it was a trick. Maybe someone had followed us. A sick game. A stalker. Some West Virginia cult with too much time and too many cameras. But deep down, I knew better. They weren't watching us. They were with us. I burned the photo. Took it out back and dropped it in the fire pit Lana's dad had built 2 summers ago. Watched it curl, blacken, then disintegrate into a spiral of ash that rose into the night like it knew where it was going. The smell that came off it wasn't paper. It was pine. Wet pine. Burned too deep, too fresh to be from anything but there. I told Lana we couldn't stay. She didn't argue. Neither of us wanted to sleep under a roof anymore. She grabbed her bag. I grabbed mine. We drove without knowing where to go. Gas stations, motel parking lots, Walmart, Cracker Barrel, anywhere with cameras and people and bright garish lights that didn't belong in the woods. We slept in shifts, ate only packaged food, never turned off the radio, not because it was comforting, but because we were afraid of the silence. And still, every morning, the handprint, no matter where we parked, it was always there. Passenger side, middle of the glass, pressed flat and perfect. even when we slept in separate vehicles. We tried to scrub it off with bleach, vinegar, degreaser, even sandpaper. It always came back, but worse than the handprint was the noise. It began as tapping again, outside, always at 3:03 a.m., then it moved inside. Once I woke up to the sound of someone whispering directly into my ear, not a voice I recognized, not a language I understood, but the tone, it was pleading, not angry, not cruel, begging. I bolted upright and slammed my head into the dashboard, disoriented, screaming. Lana banged on the window from her car. She'd heard it too. Different words, different language, same moment, same hour, same sound. And then came the drawings. On the inside of our windshields, fogged in from the night, spirals, layered over one another in perfect concentric patterns, like fingerprints from 1,000 hands, each drawing over the last, deeper and deeper. We cleaned them. They came back. Lana broke first. I woke up one morning in a Kroger parking lot and she was gone. Left her phone, her keys, everything. Just vanished. I searched the lot, checked the gas station across the street. Nothing. Then I found the note, stuffed into the vent above the microwave. I saw the clearing in my dreams. They were waiting. I have to go back. I want to go back. Don't follow me, or you'll never leave again. No signature, no smudge, just her handwriting. I drove for hours, called everyone, even her sister in Knoxville. No one had heard from her. She had vanished. Not abducted, not lost, pulled, like the spiral had finally reeled her all the way in. And that night, when I parked in a Motel 6 lot outside of Charleston and tried to close my eyes, I saw it for the first time. Not in a dream, but behind my own eyelids like a memory I never made. The clearing, the fire. Rachel, inside the split tree. Ben, sitting cross-legged in the dirt, carving spiral after spiral into his thigh with a jagged stone. His expression was peaceful, like it finally made sense, like the spiral had taught him why. And then I felt the pressure in my ear, warm breath, familiar rhythm. 3 words, like a whisper from inside my skull. You're next, Chris. I woke up screaming. This time I didn't wait. I drove straight to the edge of the state line and pulled off on a dirt shoulder somewhere near Seneca Rocks. There was no plan, no reason. Just pulling. I stood outside the car, stared into the trees. The wind was still. And then, without sound, without fanfare, Lana stepped out from behind a tree 20 feet away. But it wasn't her, not entirely. She wore the same flannel shirt, the same hiking boots, but her face, her eyes were gone. Not gouged out, not damaged, just empty. Like the forest had replaced them with something it needed more. She didn't speak. She just lifted her hand. 3 fingers. And the clearing breathed around us. I wanted to run. Every instinct in my body told me to turn, get in the car, and drive until the trees stopped lining the road. But I didn't, because in that moment, standing there on the edge of Seneca's shadow, watching Lana's empty face framed by the branches, I realized something. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not because it wasn't terrifying. It was. Every bone, every memory, every piece of me wanted to scream. But fear had changed. It wasn't the kind that makes you fight or flee. It was the kind that understood. The forest didn't hate me. It didn't want revenge. It didn't want blood. It wanted return. To the beginning. To the gate. To the truth that lies under the skin of the world. That not everything in the wild is meant to be mapped or camped beside or posted to Instagram. Some places remember you, and some places never forgive you for leaving. Lana stepped forward. Her boots barely made a sound on the leaves. Her arms didn't move naturally, like the forest was articulating her from within. She stopped 10 feet from me, close enough for me to see the dirt packed into her fingernails, the faint spirals tattooed just below her ears, the exact spot where I'd once kissed her neck in the back of the Winnebago, laughing over a campfire we thought we'd tamed. She opened her mouth, and I heard the woods speak through her. Not words, not noise. Breath, cold and full and other. And behind her, one by one, the others emerged. Ben, Rachel, the limping man, the one with no teeth. Others I didn't recognize, children, old women, people in modern clothes and people in animal skins. All of them with that same expression, peaceful, still, gone, but not dead. No one spoke, not even a whisper. They simply stared and waited. I wanted to ask why me? Why any of us? Why not just take us and be done? But I already knew the answer. We were never chosen, we chose ourselves, by walking into a place we didn't understand, assuming we could just walk back out. Cold Run Hollow wasn't a location. It was a decision, and I had made it. So I stepped forward, 2 steps. Lana smiled, not with her mouth, with her presence, like she was welcoming me home, and that's when I stopped. Because something inside me resisted, not out of fear, but out of memory. I remembered the fire. The way Ben looked at me for that one blink, the flicker of who he was fighting against, what he had become. And I realized the spiral doesn't just pull you in, it tests you. It wants to see if you'll come back willingly, if you'll walk into the tree like Rachel, if you'll sit by the fire like Ben, if you'll offer yourself up. But if you don't, if you stand your ground, you might survive, might. I took a 3rd step forward and then spoke. 3 words, quiet, human, not defiant, just true. I remember you. The woods inhaled, the trees bent inward, and then Lana blinked. A single tear welled in the corner of her eye, and for the briefest second her mouth opened and a voice came out. Run. I didn't hesitate. I turned and bolted through the brush, branches ripping at my arms, thorns slicing my legs, voices whispering from the canopy, whistles, spirals, the breathing of the trees. The ground tilted, the sky darkened, the spiral screamed in my skull. But I didn't stop. Not when my lungs gave out, not when blood soaked my jeans, not even when I heard footsteps behind me, soft, synchronized, closing in. I ran until I hit pavement, until I saw my car, until I slammed the door and drove until I couldn't see the woods in my mirrors anymore. I drove all the way to Kentucky, then Indiana. Then the edge of the Great Plains where the land is too wide, too open for trees to speak, but they're still with me. The spiral's quieter now, fainter, but not gone. The dreams still come. 3 a.m. still haunts me. Every morning I wake up and check the windows. Sometimes the handprint is there, sometimes it isn't. But I know I didn't outrun it, I didn't win. I just survived. And that survival carries a cost. Because once you've seen what waits out there, once you've heard the breathing forest and stared into the eyes of someone who used to be human, you realize the world is full of hollows. And most of them aren't on maps. So if you ever find yourself out in the back country of West Virginia, and you see a mailbox on a stump, and the trail narrows tighter than it should, and the birds go quiet, turn around. Don't try to understand it. Don't follow the spiral. Don't try to save anyone who already belongs to it, because if you don't, you may end up like me, running forever, half alive, and haunted by a place that remembers your name. I've always believed that every person has a story they never tell anyone. A quiet memory buried so deep it only resurfaces in the dark, on long drives, sleepless nights, or when the wind outside doesn't sound quite right. For me, that story begins on a stretch of cracked highway in northern Pennsylvania, 2 years ago, in the dying heat of August. My name is Wade. I was 41 then, a mechanical engineer by trade, newly divorced and recently retired from a life that never quite felt like mine. I had just bought my first RV, a 30-foot Gulfstream with faded decals and an engine that grumbled like a man who knew too much. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. I told myself I needed time to clear my head. The open road. The great American reset button. But what I got was something I still can't fully explain. That week, I'd mapped out a modest loop through the Allegheny National Forest, hitting some of the lesser-known campgrounds. I wasn't looking for tourist stops or glossy brochures. I wanted quiet, dirt roads, pines so thick they swallowed your signal. I figured the more off-grid I went, the closer I'd get to something real, to whatever I thought I'd lost back in the suburbs. The place I ended up in wasn't even on the map. Not really. There was a little handwritten sign nailed to a fence post just off Route 66 that read, Raven's Roost, Campground, 3 miles. That's it. No logo, no hours, no fee. The lettering looked old, like someone had carved it years ago and never expected anyone to follow it. But I did. The gravel road was narrow, barely wider than my RV, winding through dense patches of hemlock and birch. I drove slow, window down, breathing in the earthy smell of moss and decaying leaves. No other vehicles passed me, no hikers, no rangers. Just the sound of crushed stone under my tires and the steady drum of cicadas echoing through the trees. When I finally pulled into the clearing, it was empty. There were maybe 6 spots, all of them unmarked, around the edge of a pond, so still it looked like glass. A single fire pit sat in the center, overgrown with weeds. A rickety wooden outhouse leaned drunkenly near the tree line. No other campers, no hosts, no sign-in sheet. Just me, the forest, and an uneasy quiet that grew louder the longer I stood outside the RV. But I was tired. It was late afternoon and I hadn't eaten since breakfast, so I told myself this was perfect. Private. Peaceful. Exactly what I was looking for. That night I made a simple dinner, canned chili, cornbread and a cold beer. I sat by the pond, feet dangling off the edge of a mossy dock, watching dragonflies skim the surface as the sun bled out behind the trees. The quiet was so complete it pressed against my ears. No road noise, no planes overhead, not even the hoot of an owl. It should have been calming. It should have felt like sanctuary. But instead, I started to notice something else. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on. A kind of tension in the air, like a room where someone just argued and left. It wasn't any one sound or sight. It was the absence of them. The way even the bugs seemed to go quiet as soon as the stars came out. The way the trees stood too still. I chalked it up to nerves. New routine, new place. My body hadn't caught up yet. But around 2 a.m., I woke up to something tapping on the side of the RV. Tap, tap, tap. 3 soft knocks, deliberate, like fingers against metal. I shot upright in bed, heart kicking hard against my ribs. I held my breath, straining to hear anything else. Maybe it was a tree branch. Maybe an animal. Maybe. Tap, tap. This time it was the window. I slid out of bed, grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen counter and moved toward the window, careful not to make noise. I pressed my face to the glass and scanned the clearing with the beam. Nothing, just the pale reflection of my own scared eyes staring back at me. 5 minutes, 10. Then I forced myself to go back to bed. By morning, I'd convinced myself it was all in my head. Dreams and tree branches and the kind of isolation that plays tricks on your brain. I almost packed up and left that day. Almost. But I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I'd come here for solitude, and now that I had it, I was scared of it. So I stayed. Day 2 was uneventful. I hiked a narrow game trail up into the hills, saw some deer scat, followed a dry creek bed until my legs ached. No other campers arrived, no rangers stopped by. No signs of life, except for the occasional bird overhead. That night, I double-checked every lock, closed the curtains, and left a lantern burning low in the front cab, a soft yellow circle of comfort. I didn't hear any knocking. But around 4 a.m., I woke up choking on the thick, coppery smell of blood. The scent hit me like a punch. Metallic and sour, so strong it flooded my sinuses and burned the back of my throat. I sat up, panicked, checking my body for wounds. Nothing. I ran to the sink, splashed cold water on my face. It wasn't coming from me. I opened the door and stepped outside barefoot, scanning the area. No animals. No people. But the smell was real, dense and heavy, curling through the air like smoke, and just as suddenly as it came, it vanished, like someone flipped a switch. I didn't sleep after that. The 3rd day, I noticed the first footprint. It was behind the RV, near the fire pit, a single bare footprint in the ash and dust. Human. Adult-sized. No shoes, no tread, just toes, heel and arch. I stared at it for a long time, trying to come up with a rational explanation. Maybe it was mine. Maybe I walked there earlier and didn't remember. But when I pressed my own foot into the dirt next to it, it didn't match. My arch was different. My toes spread wider. This print was deeper, fresher. I didn't cook dinner that night. Didn't sit by the pond. Just locked myself in and sat at the table, holding my flashlight like a weapon, listening. That's when the whispering started. Not loud, not even words, just sibilant sounds. like someone standing just outside the RV, murmuring to themselves. I pressed my ear to the wall. It moved, left side, right side, then back again. Pacing, breathing. I held my breath as the whispering circled the RV. My eyes stayed locked on the seams of the door, half expecting to see fingers slip through. I don't know how long I stood there, 5 minutes, maybe 20, but the sounds didn't stop. They just looped, a breathless rhythm of half syllables and murmured nothing. Then, just as before, silence. Not a gradual fade, a dead halt, no footsteps, no rustling, just that unnatural stillness again. And I swear, God help me, I felt something lean against the RV wall, a subtle shift in weight like the whole shell of my rig dipped half an inch. I didn't move, didn't even blink. I just stood there, flashlight clutched like a lifeline, and waited for morning. When the sun finally rose, it brought no comfort. I opened the door and walked the perimeter. No footprints, no animal tracks, no sign that anyone had been out there. But I knew what I'd heard. I knew what I felt. I told myself this was the last day. I'd drive out, maybe report it to the nearest ranger station if I could find one. I just needed to eat, get my bearings and leave. But before I could even get my coffee brewed, I saw the girl. She was standing across the pond, barefoot, wearing a white t-shirt and jeans, her long dark hair hanging in tangled ropes down her back. Just standing there, still as a statue, staring at me. At first I thought she might need help. Maybe she was lost or hurt. I leaned out the RV door and called to her. "Hey, are you okay?" She didn't move. "Do you need anything?" Still nothing. I stepped down from the RV, squinting across the water. It was probably 50 feet, maybe more. The surface of the pond was too reflective to see her face clearly, but I swear, I saw her smile. Not friendly, not grateful, just knowing. Like she'd been waiting for me to notice her. I turned to grab my boots, and when I looked back, she was gone. No splash, no running, just gone. I stood there, one boot in my hand, listening to my own breath. Then I noticed the fog. It wasn't there a minute ago, but it had started rolling in from the trees. Low, thick tendrils curling across the grass like smoke on water. Within seconds, the far edge of the pond was gone. So was the outhouse. Then the fire pit. I backed up into the RV and slammed the door. This wasn't right. None of this was right. I fired up the engine, or tried to. Nothing. The starter clicked, but the engine wouldn't turn over. I cursed, tried again. Still nothing. I opened the hood and checked the battery. Intact. No corrosion. No loose cables. I was a mechanic by trade, remember? I know how engines work. This one, it wasn't just dead. It was shut down, like something had drained it in the night. The fog pressed tighter around the RV. I couldn't see 5 feet past the windshield. That's when I started to hear it again. The tapping. But this time, it was on the roof. Light, rhythmic, like someone walking in circles above my head. Then came the dragging sound. Something heavy scraping across the metal, slowly, deliberately, from the front of the roof all the way to the back. I followed the sound with my eyes, watching the ceiling like it might cave in. Then silence again. I climbed up onto the counter, popped the emergency skylight, and stuck my head out. Nothing. Just fog. Empty air. But when I climbed back down, I noticed something new. On the small kitchen table, where my map had been spread out, there were now 3 long scratches. Deep ones. Not accidental. Not the kind you make with a knife or a dropped fork. These were gouges, like someone had raked fingernails through solid wood. And next to them a word, barely etched but unmistakable, stay. I sat down in the driver's seat and just stared at it for a long time. I wasn't thinking rationally anymore. I wasn't thinking much at all. I just knew I needed to get out, even if it meant walking, even if it meant leaving the RV behind. So I packed a bag, essentials only, water, a flare, my hunting knife, a flashlight, some jerky and protein bars. I wrote a quick note just in case someone found the RV before I came back. It said, "Left to find help. If you find this, don't stay. Please." I stepped out into the fog around noon. The woods were wrong. That's the only way I can describe it. The trees looked the same, but the trail was different, subtle changes, a bend that wasn't there before, a boulder in the wrong place. I thought maybe I'd taken a wrong turn, so I doubled back. But after an hour, I was still circling. The RV had vanished. No tracks, no sounds, just fog and trees and that awful feeling in my chest like I was being watched from every angle. At one point I heard laughter, high-pitched, childlike, but distant, echoed in a way that didn't make sense, like it came from above and below at the same time. I turned and ran. I don't know how far, I don't know for how long. All I know is I broke through a wall of brush and came face to face with a cabin. It wasn't marked on any map. It didn't look lived in. The windows were covered in grime. The wood was grey and splintered. The front door stood slightly open. I should have walked away. But part of me thought maybe there's a radio. Maybe someone lives here. Maybe this is the only way out. So I stepped inside. The air inside the cabin hit me like a wall, damp, heavy, and clinging with that same coppery stench I'd smelled the night before. Not quite blood, not quite rot, just wrong. The floor creaked beneath my boots. Dust covered every surface. An old wood stove sat in the corner, rusted shut. Cobwebs hung like curtains from the rafters, swaying gently even though there was no breeze. The place looked abandoned, decades of decay without a single human touch. But it didn't feel abandoned. It felt watched. I took a few cautious steps inside, scanning the room. There was a table in the middle, bare except for a single upright photograph in a cracked wooden frame. I moved closer. It was a picture of a girl, maybe 13, 14, long dark hair, pale skin, wide eyes that looked almost startled. Her face was turned slightly, like she didn't want the photo taken. Behind her stood a man with his hands on her shoulders. His face was hard to see, blurred, overexposed. But something about the shape of his posture, the bend of his fingers, made me uneasy. Possessive, like he wasn't posing, like he was holding her there. I picked up the frame to look closer, and that's when I saw the carvings. Dozens of tiny marks scratched into the table beneath the photo, words, names, phrases. Most were faded beyond recognition, but a few stood out. Stay quiet. They follow the sound, do not look up. I backed away from the table. Then I heard it again. The whispering, not outside, inside, coming from the back room. I turned slowly, heart pounding so hard I felt it in my throat. The door at the rear of the cabin was cracked open just enough to see that the light in there was different. Not sunlight, flickering, like candlelight. Something moved, a shadow, brief, quick, across the floor beyond the door. My fingers tightened around the knife in my belt. Every instinct screamed to leave. But I told myself I had to see. I had to, because maybe, just maybe, someone was here. Maybe someone could help me get out. I pushed the door open with the tip of my boot. The room beyond was smaller, almost a closet. Just enough space for a narrow cot and a shelf stacked with mason jars, dozens of them, each filled with cloudy liquid and something floating inside. At first I thought they were pickled vegetables, but as I leaned closer my stomach turned. They were not vegetables. They were things, tiny creatures, bones, dried-out frogs with too many legs, twisted birds with human-like teeth, insects impaled with metal pins. I stumbled backward, gagging, and then I heard a new sound. Scrape. From beneath the floor. Scrape, scrape, scratch, like claws dragging along wood. I bolted. I didn't stop to close the door, didn't take the photo, didn't look back. I burst out of that cabin and ran straight into the fog, heart pounding, lungs burning. The branches slapped my face, tore at my arms, but I didn't care. I needed out. I needed out now. And then, just like that, I found the road, or rather, the road found me. I broke through the brush, and there it was. The gravel path I'd driven down days ago, cutting a pale, familiar scar through the trees. I don't know how I got turned around so badly. I don't know how I ended up miles from the RV without even realizing it, but none of that mattered. Because at the end of that road, barely visible through the thinning fog, was a figure, standing still, facing me. I froze. It was the girl. The same one from across the pond, same tangled hair, same blank stare, only now I could see her face.